Okay, with that, I will go ahead and call to order the Wednesday, May 20th, 2020 meeting of the Reno City Planning Commission. We will start with Pledge of Allegiance. Up on the screen is the American flag, so I will ask everybody to join along with me on that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2. Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
Kathleen Taylor.
Here.
Peter Gower.
Here.
Ed Hawkins. Ed Hawkins.
Here.
Paula Levis. Paul, can you unmute yourself, please? Paula Levis.
Here.
Alex Felto.
Yeah. Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is public comment. This item is for either public comment and any action item or any general public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak under this item?
We did not receive public comment for this item.
Then I will move on to item 4 of the minutes. Looking for approval for the Reno City Planning Commission meeting of April 15th.
Move to approve.
We have a motion for Commissioner Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to second. I just had one change that request in the minutes. Under the item regarding LDC 20-00052, that was the River Bend item. It lists Carrie Rodemeyer as being from Washoe County Parks and Open Space. If I could request that be changed, since she was, I believe, the consultant on the project.
Okay, I'll make that change.
Thank you.
All right, so I have Commissioner Hawkins, you okay with that since you made the motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I have a motion in the second with the revision from Commissioner Gower. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Moving on then to item 5.1 for our public hearings. We'll start with item 5.1, which is case number TXT 20-00005, Skyway Design Guidelines Text Amendment. And I believe, Angela, are you doing a presentation on this?
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Angela Foos, Acting Community Development Director. I will be doing the presentation this evening. Just give us 1 minute and we'll get set up.
Okay. Can you check the volume on that?
Hear you very good. Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah,
Better?
better.
Thumbs up?
Thumbs up. Yep.
Okay. Give us 1 minute. We're just getting set up. Again, for the record, Angela Foos, Acting Community Development Director for today. And 1 moment. Do you want me to share my screen? Would that help? Mm-hmm. Okay, is that showing up on everyone's screen? Thumbs up, thumbs down, everyone see it? PowerPoint,
It is.
yay, great, thank you. Again, I appreciate everyone working with us as we work through these technical difficulties with this new Zoom meeting format. This is a request for a text amendment that was initiated by City Council. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of history on our Skyway Design Guidelines and then talk to you about how we got to the point where we're at today. So this text amendment is changing one piece of our broader Skyway Design Guidelines. Just to give you a little bit of background, back in the 1990s, this is when the casinos started building what I would call more their sky buildings, or sky bridges, or skyways. There were a number of different approaches at that time that most of the casinos were the ones building those projects. It wasn't so much private developers or residential developers. It was mostly focused on the casinos. And there was a lot of pushback from the community, and the pushback came over the design and the location. This was changing the look and the feel of our downtown, and there was a lot of feedback from the public. So at that time, the City Council went through a very extensive process over the course of several years, collected input, and out of that, they adopted a separate set of guidelines that's now in our zoning code, and that's called Appendix B. It's the Skyway Design Guidelines. Here's kind of the synopsis of what's included in those guidelines. The things that were brought up the most, again, during that time in the 1990s, had to do with the look and the location of these sky bridges or skyways. So they focused on elements on design. Is the building or the skyway compatible with the architecture of the main building? There was also concerns about losing public space. If we have all this pedestrian activity coming off of our streets and going on these bridges, are we losing an element of downtown that at that time City Council and the community was not comfortable losing? So they put in special requirements. Again, all of these things were adopted in code over 20 years ago and are still in place today. So there's about 13 pages of very specific guidelines. That information was included in your staff report. And again, we're not looking at changing anything in those design guidelines, but I wanted to give you as planning commissioners and everyone at home watching an idea of what's included in that. So it's everything from color and materials and where lighting is allowed, how the structural support of these structures can be
I'm
designed.
in a meeting right now on a Zoom.
So how did we get to today? So those design guidelines were adopted in the year 2000. And over the last 20 years, so since then, we have not seen an actual project come forward with a sky bridge or a skyway. So recently, within the last couple of months, UNR approached us and they met with us ahead of time. They said they would like to submit an application for a special use permit. We walked through that process with them, let them know that that included 2 steps. A special use permit for skyways does include planning commission approval and city council approval. Typically, a special use permit stops after planning commission approval unless it's appealed, and then it would go to city council. But all skyway projects are required to go to public hearing both by planning commission and city council. After that discussion, again, we met with them multiple times. We gave them the design guidelines. They submitted their application. Once their application was submitted, the staff reviewer started going through the design guidelines, and they caught that we actually have a requirement for a design review committee. That was something, again, an error on our part, because when we initially met with the applicant that had submitted that, we didn't catch that. Again, we haven't used this section of code for 20 years, so it's not something that I think is at the forefront of our mind when we're looking at these projects. So that 100% error on staff for not catching that ahead of time, but here's where we're at now. So full transparency, we're not trying to hide anything. We want to be very open with the community that this was not a project that came in and we're trying to do something to get them out of this. It was truly an error of, whoops, we didn't realize this design review committee was a requirement in our code. So let's go through what that design review committee is. Again, this is verbatim from our zoning code. So anytime there's a skyway proposal, it is supposed to go to this separate group. And that group is made up of 5 different members. It's recommended that one of those come from the American Planning Association, a recommendation from the American Institute of Architects or the architect community, also from the Society of Landscape Architects, one recommended by the Planning Commission, and then one recommended by our Citizen Advisory Committee for the Redevelopment Agency. And that group in itself is not something that meets actively. We have actually kind of a quasi-group that doesn't have that same name, but pretty much functions as that same group. So when we started looking at the requirements, we realized that what would be involved in creating this design review committee is first we would have to put it out. Our city clerk puts it on our website. Anyone that wants to submit to be on this committee would put their name in. We would then give that list of names to the American Planning Association, the American Institute of Architects, the ASLA Group, the Planning Commission, and the Citizen Advisory Committee for the Redevelopment Agency. So each of those 5 groups would then make a recommendation for a voting member as the principal member and an alternate. Then those recommendations would be forwarded to City Council. City Council then has the authority to pick whoever they want to be on this design review committee. After that's completed, the design review committee would then meet and review the project, and they would provide recommendations to the Planning Commission. So they are not shown to be a voting board. They are just shown to be a board a committee that meets, reviews the projects, and provides recommendations to the Planning Commission. Again, all Skyway projects then go to Planning Commission for review, and they go to City Council for final approval. So when this issue came up, City Council initiated a text amendment, and they had a good discussion on what should they do. Is this a part of our code that we want to keep? Is this something that we can wait until we're through the zoning code update and revise our Skyway design guidelines as part of that process? Or is this something that maybe we want to have this formation be differently? Again, understanding that there's a long process to get this group formed, and it has not been formed in the last 20 years. So it's not a group that meets on a regular basis, or historically has not. So at that time, they initiated this text amendment. And their proposal was to delete this language, again, specific to the Design Review Committee, not to change anything else within the design guidelines, specific to just getting rid of this committee. And some of the discussion they had focused on what information is out there that this committee, if they were formed, what information would they be providing that's different than they and anyone else can provide now? So any project that goes to a public hearing has public comment. So at any time, anyone from the design community or anywhere else has the ability to review an application and provide comment. Again, I think the concern was, given the time, given the fact that this board has never been created, this would take months, frankly, to get that board created. We do have an application that's in now. Again, this wasn't focused on making it easier for this application. It was just focused on how do we keep things moving forward. We are in a COVID crisis. One of the comments that also came from council is we are trying to be more efficient in terms of our staff time. Creating this board would take up more staff time. There was also talk about, by not creating this committee, does it negate anyone from being able to review and comment on a Skyway project? And the answer is no. Again, because there's 2 public hearings involved, anyone at any time can provide public comment. So that gives you a little bit of history of why the text amendment was initiated. It is now up for you guys for discussion. And then based on your feedback, the next step would be to go to City Council with your recommendation either way or any feedback that you have. We'll take that to Council, and that would go back to them for 2 hearings, a first reading and a second reading. So we're still probably a good month or 2 out before anything happens with that project. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available if you have questions.
Thank you, Angela. So this is a public hearing, so I can open it up for public comment, but I do want to ask the commissioners first for any disclosures that they would have based on information that we have. I'll start with Commissioner Taylor.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Gower.
Commissioner Gower, no disclosures.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Hawkins, could you unmute, please?
Yes, I chatted with Heidi Ganser.
Thank you. Commissioner Marshall.
No disclosures.
Commissioner Levis.
Muted there. Commissioner Levis, I think one of the emails related to the next item as well as this one, and it corresponded with Heidi Ganser also.
Thank you. Commissioner Velto.
I spoke with people for and against this amendment.
And Commissioner Johnson, I received several emails and spoke with some members of the public about this item. So with that, who would like to start the discussion?
Would you like to take public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my next part. So do we have public comment on this item?
Yes, we do. We have 2. We have Lori Ray and Mercedes De La Garza registered to make public
Okay.
comment.
Okay, and we're gonna bring them into the meeting. Is that how this is gonna work?
Yeah,
Okay,
hang on just a second.
no problem.
Okay, we're going to start with Lori Ray first. Lori, you have
Okay.
3 minutes to make public comment.
All right, I can't see myself on the screen, so does that mean you can see and hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
We can
Okay.
hear you.
Okay, Lori Ray, I'm here on behalf of Scenic Nevada, and we think item 5.1 undermines the intent and purpose of Title 18 by eliminating input from the same experts and essential stakeholders that would ensure that any sky bridge throughout the city is appropriately sited and designed while being respectful of balancing the community's needs, historical preservation, and aesthetic requirements. It appears the City Council initiated this text amendment. We think it's a mistake because eliminating the Skyway Committee eliminates expert opinions and recommendations. Without that, the staff, city planning staff, and the Planning Commission are left to interpret the guidelines as is the case today. The next agenda item is to approve a Skyway at the University of Nevada. Staff recommendations and public comments like ours are important, but no replacement for expert study, analysis, and advice. For example, the Skyway request before you tonight was only reviewed by one city assistant planner. As far as the public is concerned, the noticing for the Skyway agenda item did not include a mention of Morrill Hall. We don't think many people even understand that you are about to review a Skyway that will certainly negatively impact this 138-year-old historic building forever. We doubt that much public opinion will be heard because the public doesn't know what's about to happen. Tonight's proposed Skyway already demonstrates the lack of purposeful design, placement, and respect for preserving the historic character of the area. The proposed Skyway is basically a modern utilitarian device to move pedestrians, which won't fit in because it terminates in front of Morrill Hall, a 19th century Italianate building that is prized by the community. This amendment eliminates all Skyway design review committees now and going forward. And all of this in the name of eliminating a necessary step for the university because it takes extra time. The entire purpose of this important check is to prevent badly conceived projects like the one before you tonight from blighting our community. The staff report says removing the requirement for the Skyway Design Review Committee would eliminate the extra step in the review process, but does not change the Skyway design or location criteria outlined in Appendix B. Even though the guidelines remain, removing the committee guts the ordinance. We need that extra step to supply you with the expertise to make a proper decision. Please don't eliminate it. As for the university's project, the parking garage isn't even built yet, so at this moment, there is no need for the Skyway. The community deserves a good project, not a rush job for no reason, and the Skyway Committee would ensure that that happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori.
Next up is Mercedes de la Garza. Mercedes, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Go ahead and start your public comment. You have 3 minutes.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Good evening, Chair Johnson and Commissioners. My name is Mercedes de la Garza, and I am an architect. I am licensed in several Western states, and I am NCARB certified. This credential demonstrates that I've met the national standards for licensure. I have sat on a number of city and state committees and commissions as the architect's designated seat. I'm here today to speak in opposition to item 5.1, the Skyway's Design Guidelines Text Amendment. The design guidelines provide design criteria for Skyways. There is a lengthy history to this ordinance beginning in 1995 when the City Council decided there was a need to establish a policy governing skywalks, raising their concerns about their aesthetic appearance and the impact on the streets below. They worked with downtown casino owners in finalizing their recommendations for the city's new policies and the formation of a design review committee for the professional oversight and expertise of this design guideline. I was sitting on the Redevelopment Agency's Citizen Advisory Committee when this ordinance was approved in 2000. There was a great amount of energy in the creation of this ordinance. The ordinance is called a design guideline. Within the guideline is a standard titled Architectural Compatibility. It reads, architectural compatibility is the most important element of the design guideline. Another standard is titled Design, and it reads, a primary objective is to achieve continuity in design, and further lists a number of steps to study to achieve this continuity, including massing, roof lines, fenestration, doors, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on like this. The design guidelines are very technical and specific to the review of a licensed architect and other associated professionals. To become a licensed architect, one has to complete no less than 5 years of college with an accredited architectural program, followed by 3 years of internship, then sit for a professional exam that consists of like 6 specialized divisions. There is a reason for the design review committee. It exists for the execution of this ordinance and appropriately. Each of the members is specifically appointed for their expertise in the field. This review is not something staff can remotely do on their own. I highly recommend that you do not strike the Design Review Committee from this Title 18 Skyway Design Guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes.
Thank you, and I did
Michelle,
not
do you have
receive
any
any
other-
other public comment for this item.
Okay. Thank you very much. With that, then, I will turn it over to the commission for discussion or questions of staff. I'd like to get us started.
This is Commissioner Velto, if I could ask a few questions.
The floor is yours, Commissioner Velto.
Thank you. So I guess I have some questions for staff about this ordinance. So I understand the board's never met before. Can you kind of, I know you mentioned on this that it would kind of be a lot to get it going, but can you explain what that would look like for the board to be put in place?
To be created?
What step would it take? Yeah.
Yep, so similar to when all of you applied to be on Planning Commission, there was a form you went online, you filled that out. It would be similar to that. It would be a design review committee. We would have an application opening on our website for whatever time frame we had, whether it was 2 weeks or 30 days. We would then take in a list of everyone that applied to be on the design review committee. We would then take those applicants and we would give that list to those 5 different groups that we talked about, the planners, the architects, the landscape architects, the Planning Commission, and the Citizen Advisory Committee to the redevelopment group. So each of those 5 groups would provide a principal member and an alternate, basically, that they would be proposing. Once we had the list from those 5 different groups, we would agendize it for a city council meeting. We would present all that information to city council. Council would then choose who they wanted to be on the design review committee. So that would establish the committee.
And if, I guess, is there, so our committee, or the commission seems to work well because we meet regularly. We meet every, at least once a month. It's pretty routine. Is that common with most committees or commissions for the city? And how often would you foresee this commission or this committee meeting if it were to be developed?
The way that the ordinance is currently written is the design review committee is specific to Skyway projects. So the only time they would meet is if there is a Skyway project. Based on our records, we could not find any projects in the last 20 years that included a Skyway or a Sky Bridge. So at this point, we have not had any in 20 years. But that's not to say going forward that we won't have more. Again, as the economy is starting to change, hopefully booming at some point once we get out of COVID, there could be other projects coming forth that will include a Skyway. So if that committee was formed, they would be reviewing any Skyway project that came before us. That would be the only reason for them to meet.
Commissioner Velto, additional questions?
No further questions. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Levis, I'll follow on that. You described the selection of the committee process. There hasn't been a project in 20 years, so I don't know about having a standing committee with no projects, but what would be the process of approval and the committee review, and how would you describe that once it's in place and the project comes forward, and What input does the committee have, and how does that impact things upstream?
Again, the way the code is written now is that they would review the application and forward their comments. Basically, we would take their comments and forward those comments to Planning Commission as part of their review. So they are not a voting committee. They are a committee that reviews Skyway projects, solely Skyway projects, provides comments, and those comments get forwarded to Planning Commission.
Okay, so they provide comments, so what would differ without the committee?
At this point, like I said, if anyone wants to provide comments, there is a public comment process for all of our public hearings, and so anyone can provide public comment on any of our projects.
Just not a formal process. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Olivas. Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Taylor, so let's say we had a committee back in 1990, and they wouldn't have had their first project until, or 2020. What would happen if that committee were formed and then 80% of the committee moved away, went away, did something different, weren't intact for 20 years? Would we have to start the process over to get a new committee?
And this is, again, this is an odd one. Most of our committees have term limits. And so for most committees, they meet on a regular basis, whether it's monthly or quarterly, and there's an expiration date to how long they sit on these committees. In this case, there's nothing in the code that specifies term limits or how long this committee shall be in place before they are out and a new person is voted in. So because we have not formed this committee yet, we would be starting from scratch. If we had formed this committee, let's say 20 years ago, we would have to go back to that committee, see who was still around, and see if they still wanted to participate in that committee. And then we would look at the number of members that were missing and have to go back out and, again, get names and go through that process.
And I think there is a formal process or a record of decision or a recorded process existing when people send in their comments or they go through their NAB or they fill out a comment form. Anybody from any one of these organizations, multiple people, could still comment on any sort of design on any project. Is still going to be valid twice in 2 public hearings. Is that correct?
Correct, and because the Skyways special use permits are unique in that they are required to go both to Planning Commission and City Council. Again, that is not our normal special use permit process, but that was something, again, I think is part of the discussions with the public back in the 1990s, is they wanted to make sure they had a robust public hearing process. And so that is part of the code that's in place now is, again, both Planning Commission, both City Council. Back when we had NABs, they have been inactive due to COVID. But back when we had NABs, this project would have gone to a NAB, or any project at that point would have gone to a NAB before it went to Planning Commission. All public comment is recorded, taken in, passed on to the Planning Commission and City Council prior to the meeting.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Taylor. Commissioners, additional questions? Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Angela, so we just did a pretty comprehensive review of the code during the Title 18 update process. Why was this not filtered out as something to look at during that process?
You know, frankly, we didn't even touch any part of the Skyway design guidelines. There were certain sections of the code that we didn't touch at all. You know, hillsides, well, we touched hillsides, drainage ways, our sign code, the Skyway design guidelines. There's a number of sections of our code that we just didn't touch at all. Some of those were intentional because we wanted to go back at a later time and have more of a robust discussion with the public. Other areas, it was just a copy and paste because we haven't had issues. Again, in this portion of the code, we haven't touched it for 20 years. So the way it's written, it wasn't something that we did a deep dive look at to say what needs to be revised. It was pretty much a section of code where we said, it hasn't been touched for 20 years, we're not hearing complaints, let's leave it as is unless we hear some concerns from, the public or through any of our council or planning commission meetings.
Okay. To go back to your response to one of the previous comments about committees and, term limits and all of that, I mean, from what I read in the code, there isn't really anything that says that it has to be the same people in place for any duration of time. I mean, couldn't in theory, if we get an application like the one that we're going to see next for UNR, couldn't these groups form or provide recommendations for the committee? The committee is formed, it reviews this one project, and then it's disbanded. I mean, is there anything in the code that precludes that or that governs the actions of the committee?
There is nothing in code. The code is silent on really how that committee is structured, other than the makeup of who gets to recommend, who gets to be on that committee.
Okay. So I guess the last question, if we essentially supplant the committee with planning commission, city council, and staff, is it staff's opinion that there is the level of expertise between those three groups of people that would essentially replace the expertise or what the intent would be for the expertise of the committee?
I would say from the staff review, we look at the guidelines that have been established. So we base our review on those, I think I said 13 pages of guidelines. That's how we do our review, just like anything else in the code, right? We look at what are the requirements, what are the setbacks, what are the articulation requirements, how many trees are required. Everything we do has some kind of basis to it. I think what back in the 1990s, what they were looking for was something that wasn't strict regulation or guidelines. It had more of a design input. And so I think, we have planning commissioners that have a design background. We have staff that has a design background. At this point, we don't have council members that necessarily have accredited design backgrounds, but they review projects, they have input, they know what they like and what they don't like. But I think the intent from when this DRC was initially created was because we didn't have guidelines in place that said this is what those skyways should look like, right? That's why back in the 1990s, there was so much pushback on those sky bridges and those sky buildings because there really was no requirements on what they could and could not include. It was a very small section of our code way back in in those days of what they were required to look like and how they were supposed to be designed. Out of that process came a lengthy public discussion on what those guidelines should be. So that's what we follow, is what was discussed and what was put in place based on the concerns from the 1990s.
So I guess my longer term concern is, you mentioned that we have the expertise, in place now, and that's primarily with Mark in terms of the design background. If, say 3 years from now, Mark's not here, or, we don't have that level of expertise on the commission, I guess we're assuming a lot of things if we take this committee requirement out, and we're assuming that we're going to have the level of expertise going forward. So I guess that's less of a question, just a response to that comment. I think I'm questioned out at this point, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Angela, for those responses. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Commissioners, additional questions? Angela, I have one. So I appreciate you running through the process of what's indicated here for how the committee is going to be formed, but I'm confused as to how we got to that point, and I'm even, I guess, maybe more confused backing up with respect to what was directed at the council meeting. Can you explain to me? I watched the council meeting about this, I listened to the discussion and I looked at the agenda item, and the agenda item basically was to review the requirements for establishing the design review committee or eliminate it. There was zero discussion, zero, about how to put the committee together. So I guess I'm questioning where, you've presented a very thorough analysis of how that committee is going to be put together, but none of that was included in the discussion. Is that just an assumption based on how other committees are put together? Because that wasn't part of, council didn't direct us to ignore it. They just motioned to forward the text amendment. So how do we go from considering different ways that this can be put together to just eliminating it?
Would we, again, going back a couple months, when staff first, I would say, caught this section of code, we met with our legal staff and we met with our city clerk. And we had a conversation with them about how committees are formed in the city of Reno and how this ordinance either provides clarification or doesn't provide information on how this particular committee would be formed. So working with our legal staff and with our city clerk's office, we put together a game plan of, this was before a city council even initiated this. Moving forward, how do we meet this code and also meet the requirements for forming a committee? So I went back to, based on the direction that's given in those 2 paragraphs in the code, it identifies that each of those 5 groups would make a recommendation. And we said, well, how do we do that? Is that just, let's say the APA organization nominates 2 people, and those 2 people are it for the planners, and the AIA group nominates 2 people, and those are the 2 people? Ultimately, is it up to city council? So working through kind of all those questions, we looked at how all other committees are formed in the city, whether it's a NAB or a planning commission. Ultimately, city council has the final authority. So again, looking at the language and how committees are formed, we came up with a path to move forward. When we took the initiation to city council, there was a resolution as an option, meaning if they decided to move forward with providing a DRC, we outlined in that resolution how that process would happen. They decided not to move forward with that resolution and in keeping the DRC and instead initiated staff to move forward with the text amendment, removing the DRC.
Okay. And then I guess, again, still doesn't jive with the meeting that I watched. So there must have been some conversation happening. I do remember that there was an item on our agenda in March to put forth somebody for this committee. So at some point in time, discussion was going on that was pulled without any reference to us. I guess the other question I have is, you mentioned that during the process with the incoming item, that there were meetings with staff about what needed to be done for the Skyway and all of the requirements for that. Those were looked at, and then the submittal was put in, and then it was determined that the design review committee needed to be put in place. How can that be when the design review committee is like a page after where the design review requirements are at? How does that happen?
Yep, no, just complete, staff missed it. I sat in those meetings, I didn't catch it. Again, this has been there for 20 pages, or for 20 years. Complete error.
Understood. So,
on my part. I did not read the fine print and catch that it was required. So moving forward, I said, submit your application. They did. We started down this process, and at first we said, let's form this design review committee. We said, great, let's put it on a planning commission agenda. We went to our legal staff and our clerk's office and said, are we doing this correctly? Here's what the code says. How should we be doing this? We pulled it off of the agenda, planning commission agenda, and we said, let's first go to city council and get direction on this.
okay. So I guess then moving forward, because moving backwards just making me angry. Moving forward, if this is eliminated from the code, what I'm hearing staff say is that they believe that Planning Commission and City Council, with whatever public comment is provided to us, and then staff would be adequate to review the rather dense design terminology that's in here and make recommendations that would be apparently just as well informed as if the design review committee did that. And we feel that that's okay even moving forward when we have the potential for additional sky buildings in other places in town as the economy picks back up.
Is
That's what I'm hearing from staff.
So at this
That
point,
it's okay that we can eliminate this completely for any potential future skyway.
at this point, staff has been directed by City Council to eliminate the Design Review Committee. If Planning Commission disagrees, now is your opportunity to provide those comments, and we will forward those comments to the City Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, any additional questions?
I want to bring up one thing.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Hawkins, one thing that I've thought about a great deal is these skyways started down there in core of the city of Reno, starting with, I believe it was Harrah's. And for a long time, nobody would put up a skyway because at that point in time, they didn't own the street underneath it. What's my question is, we're putting in these skyways, and the street underneath it still has the ownership to the city of Reno. And a lot of these casinos think that they own that sidewalk, that they own that street underneath that skyway, and something's got to be done about that as well. I mean, what's going to happen if this 5.2 tonight passes for the special use permit? I mean, what's going to happen with the roadway on 9th Street? We don't know. So I'm concerned in that area. We have a fine commissioner here, Mark Johnson, that is our architect, and he does a fine job. So I'm just saying, overall, I believe we need to stick with what's already laid down in 2000, and that's with the Design Review Committee, because they would be the experts in what we're dealing with right now. That's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. You transitioned us into discussion from questions. I appreciate that. There's no other questions, discussion before a motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow on in the discussion mode, I appreciate staff's situation. They're being directed by council to put something before us, and the direction was to remove the Design Review Committee language. I guess my take on that is that it's a little bit rushed, a little bit rashed, adjusting this code language without having a little bit more discussion in terms of, are there other changes that need to be made to the code, to give staff the tools and Planning Commission the tools to be able to evaluate skyways in the future. I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to have and that council needs to be involved in, instead of just reacting to an application and coming up with a solution to remove the barrier to that application, which is the Design Review Committee. So at this point, I'd like to have, if we're going to open up the code section, let's open it up. We'll look at it just like we did in the Title 18 process and have a more comprehensive conversation. Because I don't think as a city that, we really want to be in a situation where we're being reactive. We want to be proactive and thinking about skyways that may be coming, maybe it's another 20 years before the next one comes, but we want to be in a better position for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. Additional discussion items?
Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Got one comment I want to make on the downtown core. When these skyways first started going in, they were to stay within the core of the downtown area. we're talking about going up to UNR. We've already crossed I-80 and sampling our feet in the university, and we need to look at what the code says right now regarding the core, and that's the only place it's supposed to have a skyway or a sky bridge, whatever you want to call it. But the old rules were only the downtown core could have them. And I'd like to see something in writing saying that that's been changed.
And I can respond to that. Our section of code has a map and provides a location for where skyways are allowed. And this location is shown as an allowed location for a skyway. I shouldn't say this location, the next item on the agenda was shown, but for your purposes, there's a section of code that provides a map of where skyways are permitted.
Thank you. Thank you.
Angela, Commissioner Johnson, just to follow up on that, is there a distinction in that code between skyways and sky bridges in terms of their allowable area?
I believe, and I'd have to go back and check, I believe they're all kind of lumped into one category. I can go back and check and send you that section of code. It's not in this Appendix B, it's in a different section of code.
Thank you. Commissioner Taylor?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Taylor, I have another question for Angela. This design review committee, when and if it ever meets, when the recommendations are developed from it, what happens with those recommendations, and are they binding? Does council or the planning commission have to go by those recommendations, or is there anything, I guess, that the recommendations coming from that committee, does it have any more weight than a regular public comment, or any more? I'm just trying to understand the difference, because it seems like anybody at any point can give their expertise in public comment on any item. And with this committee that we're asking or researching, it's going to take time and more resources that frankly I don't know if we necessarily have. Does it come with some sort of voting or power, or what does the recommendation mean from this design committee that hasn't met in 20 years?
Yeah, so the intent, if this DRC was formed, is that a group of design professionals would review the application and provide comments, and then those comments would be forwarded to the Planning Commission for their input, and also to the City Council for their input. So it is not a voting committee. They do provide recommendations, and again, the idea is that they are a group of design professionals, so they would be coming from, I would say, a different perspective than somebody who doesn't have that accredited professional background. But their comments are forwarded. It is not a binding requirement that Planning Commission move forward with those comments. It's just to take those comments in.
Okay, thank you. And then I think when we were doing some of the code updates discussions, there were other discussions about design review committees for, I think it was maybe architectural standards. And I could be wrong, but I thought that was something that we, or maybe it was just me, wasn't necessarily in favor of moving forward because it was a duplication of efforts. And one more outside, I actually have a question. There are design standards for skyway bridges and skywalks, right? It's not just anything can happen, right? There's pages in the code for that now, design requirements?
There is, and that is the section of code that was updated during the 1990s, again, when there was a lot of public outcry on what was happening in downtown with the sky buildings and sky bridges. So as a result of that, the public came together, worked with staff at that time, this is in the 90s, and they put together what is in code today. So those are the design guidelines that are still in place today.
Thank you.
Commissioner Velto, could I have an opportunity?
Commissioner Velto?
So I guess I have a few comments and maybe partially a question. Generally, I guess it seems like it's a big hassle for us to put this committee in place if it only meets once every 20 years. And I get that there might be some optimism that they'll meet more in the future, but kind of the explanation as to how you would have to get people in that position, keep them satisfied on a board, it seems like it might be a little bit difficult to maintain if they're not being used as often, and if there's kind of turnover. That being said, I think there's I don't think this modification to that portion of the ordinance is enough. The design review committee, that phrase, is used in a couple other parts in this portion of code, and it gives them authority to, for instance, determine the appropriate proportion of right-of-way encroachments. So it seems like the design review committee, if we were to just remove the section that's scratched out in red, we'd still be leaving them duties in the code. So I don't know if we were to decide to pass this tonight, I think that we would need to look at the other portions of code and try to change it, which makes me think that we probably shouldn't do this yet until we ensure that the other portions of code don't conflict. I haven't, that's just my general concern because I see this phrase in other portions of the code.
Okay, I think that's a good comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Belto. Any additional comments from you?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Marshall, and then Commissioner Levis, I see you as well. So, Commissioner Marshall?
Yeah, I think this agenda item brings kind of to a sharp point a number of different planning considerations. And so I've kind of a couple that I want to just run through. The first one is it really is a danger to make general policy on the back of a single project. I think the commissioner's already kind of talked to that point. And this is, I think, a good illustration of, in order to facilitate what may or may not be a good project, or what, you know, some people may be in favor of or not, it is to jettison a portion of code that has further application than just this particular situation. And of course, what makes it all the more poignant, perhaps, and, you know, no disrespect intended, we're here because of a process error. And that if this had been caught early in the project, or people were familiar and had read the entire section of the code or whatever, then, you know, it may be a very different outcome. And so so we are basing a policy change on the demands of a single project, and that policy has substantial changes or substantial effects in many other areas of the city. And that kind of brings me to the second point, which is more tied into what this provision really does and what it's supposed to guarantee. And it's pretty clear in the city's 2000, you know, the adopted language is that the committee is to provide this kind of super public input, and that specific language about, you know, a public perspective that is different from what you get in public comment. They could have not had it, and we would have had public comment, but it was determined that there's something critical here about the kind of public perspective that these facilities need. And I think that's in part recognition, and, you know, speaking from my own experience, that, you know, as a member of a agency, one can get, I don't want to use tunnel vision since that's used in the language of the whole, you know, of the ordinance, but you know, you can get in a mindset where either you don't have the expressed qualifications, or you've seen enough of them, or whatever pressures might come to bear, that an outside review by citizens who are specifically qualified are important, because these particular sky bridges, sky buildings, sky walks have a significant impact. And I think if you read through some of the design guidelines, there is an expressed concern about these particular structures and the impacts they may have on the public. Next, what really the committee is designed to do is to provide the input, and I think Commissioner Johnson and others have pointed out, provide the input on an incredibly design-heavy section of code. And while, I always say a law degree qualifies me to be every other kind of expert there is, that's not true. And I can't, there's a certain, when you're looking at things like articulation, of integration of materials, of fenestration, of all those things that, we have, there is an important need to have people who really have a keen understanding and not just a practical experience, but an educational experience with it. And so that I think that's why the code I think was written in the way it was. And then you have this kind of design review committee to give a recommendation, not just comment, but a recommendation to the planning committee and the city council. And just talking about that for a minute, and this is kind of the third principle, is what is the basis upon which we are to make our decision in applying these particular provisions of the design, these really fairly technical design elements. Personally, I would very much like to see a recommendation of a group of experts that are architects, landscape architects, and all the other design professionals that are in here that are specified as to provide the basis for the exercise of at least my recommendation of my discretion. Without it, what are we to rely on? We're kind of left with a staff report that for their specific item, and we can talk about that one next, but it requires that the staff report, and this is Commissioner Johnson's perspective, substitute for that professional judgment and those professional recommendations of how these skywalks, sky buildings, et cetera, integrate and whether or not it's an appropriate use in that particular location. And I worry that without that, what are we individually, me as an attorney, or who, you all with your particular backgrounds, use to gauge these things, except for our kind of common sense, which can get us partly the way. But I think the reason why it's a recommendation, not just available a public comment, is if they make recommendations, then we need to have as either the recommend, either in the planning commission role or in the role of the city council, we need to have something that says, or that we can rely on, that says, no, their opinion is wrong, and we want to go this way. So it creates a kind of a, it's not just public comment. There's a specific reason why there's a recommendation from design principles, and that if you deviate from those experts, then you need to have a basis for it. You just can't be, an arbitrary thing that, well, I want to, support the university here and approve this sky bridge. Not saying that that's a bad thing. There may be lots of social justifications for why we want particular projects, but the history of these sky bridges are such that the city decided to create a special process. And just because it's inconvenient, I don't think we should deviate from the good policy that was adopted. So that's my lectures. Thanks for bearing with me.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Commissioner Olivas?
I'm gonna mute myself there, okay. Commissioner Olivas, I guess we'll start out, I think that following Commissioner Marshall here, I don't know that this is necessarily on the back of this project. It certainly seems like it, but I would view this more in that this project shined a light on this, and it needs to be dealt with. So different twist on that. I guess that said, I kind of, to Angela's comments earlier, sorry, Angela, I disagree with you, that the COVID crisis is not a good reason to do this. By that very same logic, we should probably disband the Planning Commission and the City Council and just let staff deal with everything. This will pass, this will be done, and we still need to keep the committees and commissions together. That said, I think that a committee that hasn't met in 20 years and has never even been formed is pretty much irrelevant. None of us here would have had any experience dealing with this because there hasn't been one in over 20 years. So all of our terms are long beyond that. I think that we do need public input. We need expert input, but to have something that a whole committee for something that happens once in 20 years, how many other committees are we going to have out there for everything else that happens only once every 20 years? We do need a process, and I think that this needs to fit into the existing generalist processes of the Planning Commission and the City Council. And because of that, I think that we should get rid of this committee and let the current processes handle it.
Thank you, Commissioner Olivas. Any other comments from commissioners before I make my comments?
Can I just make 2 quick points, Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Gower?
The first one, I'll promise I'll be quick. The first one is that committees form subcommittees all the time to address specific topics. Subcommittees or committees can be formed and disbanded pretty quickly. It happens all the time. Number 2 is that I really appreciate Commissioner Velto's comments. Looking through the code, I'm seeing where the Design Review Committee shows up in other places in the code, and I think that's the perfect example of why we shouldn't be rushing this, that we need to take a more comprehensive look at it. Maybe getting rid of the Design Review Committee is the right approach, but just throwing that in as amendment and saying yes or no it's not only bad policy, it's bad planning, and it's doing a disservice to our community.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower. I'll just sum up. I mean, obviously, you guys know where I'm coming from on this as an architect. If anything, I feel almost personally slighted by the idea that this isn't seen as something that is important, or that it's seen as an unnecessary step, or that it's seen that anybody can come in and give public comment that is in and should be considered by members of this committee or City Council as having just as much weight as the recommendations of someone with my qualifications would have. I thought it was interesting that one of our public commenters tonight actually listed her qualifications at the beginning of her public comment. And I think that was done purposely. Like there is an awful lot of education and background and knowledge that goes into understanding the concepts that this code requires skyways, sky bridges, everything to follow. I think it is a gross injustice to the entire design community to just say that anybody is able to make public comment and it's all incorporated into what's being done. I appreciate the comments from the commission here that note that there is, there's a heavier weight, whether it's a voting member or not, to having that reviewed and looked at. Not just somebody looks at the staff report, but there's an actual presentation that's made to a committee, discussion and recommendations provided with educated background. So I think for something that is, an actual element that, as Commissioner Hawkins points out, is going into the public way, that the public should be better served by having as much expert advice on that as possible. It's a shame that this didn't come up sooner to be better defined. I think in some ways it was definitely put together as a reaction to what had happened previously downtown with some items that, per the code, some sky bridges that wouldn't be able to be built the way they are under this code. I think that it was a good comment from Commissioner Hawkins about where these things can go. I think there's a limited number of places where sky bridges and skyways can and cannot go, but anywhere that one has to go, there's going to be design constraints between the buildings, the neighborhood, anything, that just having someone from the public come in and say they don't like it, or they don't think the colors are right, or, you know, not to demean that, but that's not a professional opinion. So I'm disappointed that the idea put forth by council was that this wasn't important and that it should be eliminated because of the time that's involved, because of the added level of work that staff has to do. I still just, and to all of you, I appreciate it, but I'm frankly insulted that that's what's being put forth for my profession. So I think it's a bad idea. I don't think it's related to this one project. I think it's related to development elsewhere that could happen moving forward. I think what we should be looking at is a more comprehensive review of this to both integrate this appendix into the code rather than leaving it as a separate item, clarifying what the design review committee needs to be, whether it's a subcommittee that's formed by standing members of these organizations, so you don't have to worry about terming out, you just have the organizations provide any particular representative. I think there's ways to clean up the language, as was pointed out by Commissioner Belto. I just think to come in and just say we don't need professional expertise on this, that we can handle it by the commissions, is the wrong way to go. I've said my piece. This is a text amendment. It's a recommendation to City Council in terms of how this goes forward. And I guess I would also say, for those of you that, you know, are thinking, you know, both for this and anything else where we say, you know, the can or cannot take the input of the public, this whole text amendment and this whole process ultimately goes to City Council anyway. So for those of us that both listen to or don't listen to and take into account the public comment, City Council has that very same option with us. So we're making a recommendation to them, and our comments are being forwarded to them. But just like ultimately the design, the way this is written, it's being determined by this committee. So with that, we have a proposed motion, or I guess I'm looking for any kind of motion for this text amendment as a recommendation one way or the other to City Council.
I'd
Chair,
like to make a motion. Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Marshall?
I'd like to, based upon compliance with applicable findings, I move to recommend that the City Council deny the text amendment by ordinance.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. I have a motion.
Hawkins, second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? Okay, I'm going to call out by name for votes so we get it onto the record, starting with Commissioner Taylor.
No.
Commissioner Gower,
Yes.
Commissioner Hawkins,
No.
are you voting for or against the motion to not
I'm
recommend?
voting to send this back to City Council with our disapproval.
So you're in favor of the motion?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Marshall,
Yes.
Commissioner Olivas,
I am not in favor of the motion, no.
Commissioner Velto,
yes.
and Commissioner Johnson, yes. So the motion to recommend denial to council passes 5 votes in favor, 2 votes against. Angela, are we good to move on to the next item?
We are, and we will include Planning Commission's comments, or as we forward that recommendation, we will also include all of your comments so that they can review the script and have a better understanding of why you voted no.
Thank you. And just as a clarification on that, the public comment goes in with that as well as the comment cards that were submitted separate from this meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Chairman, point of order. Quick question for, I guess I'm kind of confused on the procedural posture of moving to the next agenda item, given how we just voted on this agenda item. Seems like we can't hear that item because that item has not gone before the committee. That hasn't gone before the committee.
The next agenda item is a special use permit, and your vote is a recommendation to council. So while you voted no on the text amendment, that text amendment still has to go to council for their review. The special use permit also has to go to city council for their review. So your vote tonight is a recommendation that will be forwarded to city council.
This is Commissioner Marshall. I think, though, Commissioner Velto is making a point that, you know, the way that the code now reads and that we recommended that stays in place is that you have to go through this process to get a recommendation first. And that application has not done so. So how is it even within our jurisdiction to hear this project when it hasn't satisfied the basic elements of the existing code?
Very well put, Commissioner Marshall. Thank you.
Correct. Well, while we're not on that agenda item yet, there is a condition of approval that requires the text amendment to be approved before the special use permit can be approved. So if for some reason both of those items go to council and get denied by council, let's say that text amendment does not go forward, that special use permit is not approved. However, if the text amendment gets approved by council, that special use permit would also have to be reviewed and approved by council, but then it would move forward as an approved special use permit. Carl Hall is also on the line if you would like to provide some legal input into that question, Carl.
Yes, this is Carl. You know, I would request that you go ahead and hear item 5.2, even though you voted to not approve the text amendment. I think to have a full record in front of council, I think it would be appropriate to consider this item. I think it's, you know, in light of the prior vote, I think, you know, I can read the tea leaves and see, you know, where the commission is going on this. Nevertheless, I think both items should proceed up to city council in light of the fact that you're making a recommendation. And even though you don't have the benefit of the input from professionals from the design review committee.
Carl, would it be appropriate for a motion to continue the item until the city council hears the recommendation on the text amendment?
Yeah, that would be a good option.
Do we need to call that item first?
Yes.
Okay, I can't call the next item to order. I have to recuse myself from the next item. So before that gets called to order, I'm going to ask that Michelle, I'm going to basically leave the room and I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
And again, for the record, because this item 5.2 has been agendized, we do have to open it and take public comment. And then if you choose to continue it, you can do so after you've taken public comment.
Okay, do we, for clarification, do we have to go through the presentations?
No, you don't have to go through the presentation.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is 5.2, case number LBC 20-00047 Gateway Parking Complex Skyway. Do we just move right into public comment, Michelle?
Hang on just 1 second, please.
Yep, I'm going to defer to Carl on that. Do we need to do any disclosures before they
And we do have the applicant's representative on the line.
We can take public comment and have a presentation from the applicant if he wants to do the presentation. But I would like to have a public comment on the item before there's a motion to continue.
Should we go ahead
Okay,
and
so it
take
sounds like
the,
we're gonna
bring the applicant on?
So maybe what we can do is we can ask the applicant if they would like to make a presentation before we move to public comment.
Okay, do we have the applicant in the room or
Um,
in the meeting?
he's online right now. Francisco, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Francisco. Thank you for being with us. Would you like to make a presentation at this time?
I believe so, yes. Why not? It would be a very similar presentation that we would have given the design review committee if there was one. So,
Okay, do you have materials that we need to get ready, Michelle?
Yes, just one moment.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Stand by, Francisco. We're bringing up your presentation. So you can present. You should be able to share your screen now, Francisco. And you'll have 15 minutes to do your presentation. Let me know when you're ready.
yes. I'm ready. Says that I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to give this brief presentation regarding the special use permit requested for the University of Nevada, Reno Gateway Precinct Skyway / pedestrian bridge. On the call today with me are Christopher Cox, UNR project manager, lead of this development, Heidi Gansert, UNR executive director, external relations, Michelle Wendler with WD-A&E, principal in charge and architect of record, and I am Francisco Navarro, WD architecture and engineering project manager. If Heidi is available to speak, she was going to talk regarding do a real quick presentation regarding the background information on the UNR master plan and how we have gotten to the development as it stands today.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay. Thank you again, Heidi Gansert, Executive Director of External Relations for the university. I just want to take a couple minutes and talk broadly about the master plan. The gateway area of the University of Nevada, Reno, which is the area that is south of 9th Street, essentially between the alleyway that is between Virginia Street and Center Street, then to Evans Park, was part of an overall master plan that was developed and approved by the Board of Regents in 2014, December of 2014. That master plan, which included the gateway, and that gateway specific area was adopted by the City of Reno in April 2016. During the master planning process, we had input from dozens and dozens of people, and since that plan was approved and then adopted by the city, in particular the gateway area, it's been about 5 years. We've had over 20 public hearings around what is going to be in the master plan, or excuse me, in the gateway area. The parking garage is the first building that's being proposed, and what you have before you today is a pedestrian overpass, and the pedestrian walkway is specifically for ADA compliance. So again, the reason that we have, and we're proposing this overpass, this walkway, is for ADA compliance. And so I just wanted to let you know the other buildings planned for the gateway right now are a new College of Business and 1 or 2 life sciences buildings, and those will be developed over time with the College of Business probably being the next one queued up. And so we really need to be able to get a pedestrian overpass because the entrance to campus from the gateway is too steep as it currently exists. So this is a big part of the connectivity that we need between the gateway and main campus. And once again, reflecting back on the master plan, we did partner with the city of Reno and with the RTC because we wanted to serve as a catalyst for the redevelopment. And we want to be of the area between downtown Reno and the gateway, which is finally happening. So it's been really 5 years and that's starting to happen. And something else that's significant in the area is that the RTC was able to get a grant to extend their rapid transit to help move students, faculty, and staff back and forth between the city and Gateway and main campus. And that project's underway. So if you were to go up there right now, you would see some major construction by the RTC, again, around connectivity to the rest of the community and campus. And you'd also see that there's been a lot of changes in that area as we move forward with this really important area of campus. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Francisco.
Sure. This next slide is just a real quick presentation of what the existing master plan and the zones as they were directed. And our project lives in the zone number 5, which is the gateway, or red on the screen. I will now just, thank you, Heidi. I'll now just describe a few of the key elements of the design of the Skyway pedestrian bridge that we have. And the main purpose of the bridge, or the pedestrian pathway, is to provide this accessible path from the Gateway precinct to the main campus via the new garage. Basically, users would go in through the garage up to level 4 and be able to cross the street over 9th Street. The design of the Skyway itself is an open steel truss frame reminiscent of historical railway bridges. And we know that we've seen that Reno is a railway historical downtown, and there's a lot of history with the railway, which is why we chose to go with this open truss design. And then the finished materials selected are consistent with the new garage design, and the finishes are taken from UNR's campus context and architectural palette. In this color slide plan that you see before you, we are laying out, you can see the layout of what the Skyway is between the new garage to the south, that you can see in the yellow block. And as it passes over the public right-of-way, 9th Street, and which is basically the subject of today's special use permit request, the portion of the bridge that crosses the public right-of-way. The Skyway layout consists of 3 distinct bridge sections, and the first one being next to the bridge over 9th Street. The 34-degree angle bend that you see in the pathway as it traverses towards the campus is there for the purpose and was taken into careful consideration, avoiding the disruption to the existing mature and rather large trees that are on site, taking into account the trees and the tree canopy as well. The third section of the bridge span, which is the furthest to the north, spans over the existing ore ditch and terminates approximately 25 feet south of the existing sidewalk that travels along the parking lot that is in front of Morrill Hall. The bridge itself ends approximately 150 feet away from Morrill Hall entry to the north and is approximately 110 feet west of the existing stairway that is there on site. In this slide, the top of the page is the elevation for the Skyway over the public right-of-way. As you can see, the truck is bounding a 10-foot wide pedestrian walkway that has a covered roof to provide the accessible walkway a protection from the elements. As noted here, and we highlighted it, the 20-foot floor clear on the south side of the bridge and the 18-foot, 7-foot clear on the north side of 9th Street is just based off of the natural grade of the street, of 9th Street as it stands now. Since the bridge is only 10 feet wide, and because of its natural nature of the open air truss design and see-through capability, we are requesting that the commission is flexible on the 20-foot clearance throughout the entire public right-of-way, as we do not feel that the bridge will cause the tunnel effect that is noted in the ordinance by much larger structures as the sky buildings or the other type of sky bridges over the public right-of-way. The two sections below, or the elevations below, are the second and third span as it crosses over the Ore Ditch. These are just graphical representations. To the right, we have then a section of the curved cover of the bridge, and you can see the trusses on either side bounding the walkway. In this view, you can see a rendered representation of what the Skyway would look like looking east from Center Street. The new garage is to the right and the campus is on the left. The base concrete support systems are cladded with brick to match the new garage finish, and in turn relates to the UNR finish palette. You can see that is very see-through, and we can see the exposed curved truss of the bridge. In this view, we are looking back from the Lake Street side, and along the bottom there, you can see the new fence line along the north side of 9th Street that has been added to discourage pedestrians from crossing the street mid-block. So actually asking that they actually take the bridge to get to the high side of campus. In this next slide is a night rendered version of it, and as you can see, the bridge itself or the walkway will be well lit for safety, and we've also added a slight band of accent lighting at the two portico pilasters at either bookend of the main span of the bridge and along the trim roof line. This last slide is just some views of the existing street, looking down 9th Street from either end, looking towards where the proposed Skyway will be. Thank you. That is our presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to need a little guidance now. Are we going back to public comment?
Do we need a presentation from staff? Wait,
Can't hear you. Angela, you're muted.
There we go. Let's go ahead and do a presentation from staff and then open it to public comment, and then you guys can choose to continue it or vote on it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Anne Marie, are you there?
I am here.
Are you able to share your presentation, your screen? Or do we need to bring it up for you?
Can you just direct me? I apologize. New format. If I
We'll bring it up
have
for
it
you.
on my computer.
You should have a share screen.
If you run your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom, there should be a green button that says share screen.
Okay, I've got it. So have I successfully shared my screen?
Yes, you have.
Yes.
You can start.
Good evening, Commissioners. As discussed by the applicant, this is a request to construct a covered open-air skyway pedestrian bridge over 9th Street, connecting the UNR Gateway parking garage to UNR campus. The project site is located within the mixed-use University of Nevada Regional Center zoning district. The project has a master plan use designation of public, quasi-public, and is located within the University District of the Downtown Regional Center. This project is in substantial conformance with the master plan as it supports regional initiatives for growth of the University District, as well as strengthens the linkages between the UNR campus and downtown. At the time of staff report publication, staff have received one public comment opposing the project. Since then, staff has received an additional 11 public comments in opposition. And I apologize, this slide was sent prior to 2 emails coming through. And so that number on the screen should say 12, and that's 1 in favor, 1 in opposition. All of those comments have been sent via email to the Planning Commission for review. The most common concern noted in the public comments relates to potential impacts to Morrell Hall as a historic resource. Although this building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, it is not listed on the Reno Register of Historic Places. Finding B specifically contemplates impairments to historical resources officially recognized by the city of Reno. That being said, Morrell Hall is over 100 feet north of the bridge connection to the walkway south of the parking lot in front of Morrell Hill. So there on the screen, you should be able to see where the hall is and then the approximate bridge location, as was stated by the applicant, 25 feet south of the existing walkway. Due to the existing elevation change between Morrell Hall and the proposed location of the skywalk, and the sky bridge is not anticipated to have a negative impact to Morrell Hall. Staff would like to point out that RMC requires that skyways be reviewed by a design review committee prior to the hearing for the Planning Commission. On April 8th, 2020, City Council initiated a text amendment to specifically remove the Skyway Design Review Committee regulations from the Skyway Design Guidelines. As such, approval of the special use permit is contingent on the approval of the Skyway Design Guidelines text amendment by City Council. Per RMC, a special use permit for Skyways requires a public hearing by City Council, and as such, the proposed motion is a recommendation. The recommendation from staff reads, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to recommend that City Council approve the special use permit subject to conditions. Staff is available for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Okay, I believe we're going to bring it back to the commission and ask for disclosures. Let's start with Commissioner Olivas.
Commissioner Olivas, yeah, there we go.
Commissioner Olivas received emails, visited the site, and spoke with the applicant's representative.
Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower received and read emails and visited the site.
Thank you. Commissioner Marshall?
The same. Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins? You're on mute.
Commissioner Hawkins, do you have a disclosure?
Yeah, well, yes, I'm trying to say it, but it looks like I was muted. Anyway, talked to the applicant's representative, visited the site, walked it around, and read several emails.
Commissioner Belto?
Commissioner Belto, the same.
Commissioner Taylor, same as me. Thank you. So now, do we need to ask the applicant if they are interested in continuance,
Wait,
or do we just make?
We have public comment.
Oh, sorry.
We received.
Oh, that's right. Dan.
Yes, we received a request to speak from Lori Ray on this item. One moment.
Welcome again.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Commissioners. So Lori Ray here on behalf of Scenic Nevada. We are opposed to the Skyway, which would cross over 9th Street and extend into the green belt that graces the front of historic Morrill Hall on the University of Nevada campus. And I hope you had a chance to read the letter that we submitted about this. The proposed structure is an unnecessary intrusion on this historic side of the university that provides a park-like setting befitting the importance of Morrill Hall, the first building on campus, built in 1886 that welcomed the first 35 students. We think it's important to note that this relevant information was not included by staff and the applicant. Morrill Hall is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the proposed Skyway terminates in front of it, yet Morrill Hall isn't even mentioned in the staff report. The proposed Skyway doesn't just cross over a street, depositing pedestrians safely on the other side, but continues up a hillside and through a green belt, ending in front of an architectural treasure. If you proceed, we think the Skyway should terminate at the north side of 9th Street at the sidewalk instead of continuing up the hillside and bisecting the green space, ruining the historic ambience there. If installing an elevator on the opposite side is not feasible, simply limit pedestrian crossings to Lake and Center Streets at ground level and not permit a Skyway at all. Also, we are opposed to blocking pedestrians from accessing the staircase at Lake Street and 9th. There is no reason for it. The Regional Transportation Commission suggestion was to light the crosswalk at Lake Street in the same way as lighting is proposed for crossing Center Street at ground level. And it did not prohibit pedestrians from crossing at the corner of Lake and 9th Street, where the staircase is located. So staff says the proposed Skyway is compatible with surrounding development, finding A, and enhances the character of the area, finding B, for general special use permits. It's hard to understand how the modern utilitarian boxcar look of a Skyway is compatible with or enhances a 19th century Italianate building listed on the National Register. In the Skyway guidelines, finding B says the Skyway must not impair the view of scenic and significant historic resources. And the staff report says the project is not in close proximity to scenic or historic resources. Therefore, the project proposal complies with finding B. On the contrary, the proposed Skyway barrels through a beautiful green space and stops dead in front of Morrill Hall, destroying the feeling of tradition and serenity that has been there for over 100 years. Please consider our request to deny this project because of A and E of the general SUP findings cannot be met, along with finding B from the Skyway guidelines. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lori. Michelle, do we have other public comments?
I did not receive any more requests to speak on this item.
Okay, so we will close public comment and look for direction on a. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise.
Yep, so you guys have some options now. If you choose to continue it without any discussion, you can make a motion to continue it. If you guys want to have discussion first and then make a motion to approve, deny, continue, add conditions, you have that option as well.
Commissioner Marshall?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'd like to make a motion to continue the matter until the City Council hears the text amendment question.
Mr. Gower, I'll second.
Can we have a motion and a second? Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll vote. Commissioner Hawkins?
I vote for continuance.
Commissioner Davis?
Commissioner Olivas, I'd vote against the continuance. I'd like to hear this and approve it tonight, but that's probably not where this is going. I'll vote no.
Commissioner Gower?
Yes.
And Commissioner Villito?
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor, yes. Motion carries for continuance. Sorry, Mr. Marshall?
So yes,
Did I forget you?
no worries.
A lot going on here. It's a lot of work for a continuance.
Pressure. Power is
Okay.
your head.
It looks like that motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1. And then we can bring back our real chairman.
Thank you.
Where did we miss you?
Oh, you didn't miss me. I'm back, though. Glad to be back. All right, are we ready to move on to item 5.3?
Yes, just one
Okay.
moment.
Thank you. With that, I will move to item 5.3, which is case number LDC 20-00053, Golden Valley Commercial. Do we have a presentation from the applicant?
We will, just one moment.
Okay.
Mike, are you there? Mike, can you hear me?
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you have 15 minutes
Yes.
to do your presentation.
Evening, Mike. How are you?
Good. For the record, Mike Raley with Christie Corporation, here representing the project applicant. Also logged on tonight is Ryan Switzer with Robeson Engineering, the project engineer, and Pat Owens, the project applicant. I think I'm going to take Michelle up on her offer and have her run my PowerPoint. My iPad tends to script some of the formatting, so it might look a little better on her screen rather than mine. So if she wouldn't mind, and I'll just give her direction on when to switch slides.
Okay, just one moment. We're bringing it up right now.
Michelle, I'm not sure if I'll be able to see it, so you might need to let me know when it's up.
Should be able to see it now. See it? We're getting there.
Great. We can go to the second slide, Michelle.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is a special use permit to allow for a self-storage facility and a car wash within the AC zone, and to allow for commercial uses that operate 24 hours a day. Next slide, please. The project site is located essentially between US 395 and North Hills Boulevard along Golden Valley Road. The Raley Center is just there to the north, and then directly north of us is the U.S. Post Office and the bank, Jiffy Lube, and Wendy's, to give you a frame of reference of where the site is. Next slide, please. These are the existing site conditions. As you can see, it's vacant. Essentially, it's flat. There is some topographic relief between our site and the bank parcel to the north, but our site is, generally speaking, is flat. Next slide, please. As you see, the entire site is zoned AC, as are all the adjoining properties to the north. We do not have any residential zoning adjoining the site. Next slide. So the project overall will include an indoor self-storage use, a hotel, a sit-down restaurant, a gas station with convenience store, and a car wash. If we can go to the next slide, we'll show you the site plan and how it's all laid out. So the storage building is located kind of there on the north side in the central portion of the site, the hotel on the west side, the restaurant at the northeast corner, and then the car wash and the gas station are really oriented more towards the freeway itself. Next slide. So even though we're showing all the uses on the site plan, I think it's important to note that all the uses, with the exception of the self-storage and the car wash, are allowed by right and are not subject to this special use permit. The gas station and the convenience store and the restaurant will operate 24 hours. 24-hour operation is not proposed for the storage facility or the car wash. The hotel use is allowed to operate 24 hours by right. The site really is located within the commercial core of Golden Valley. We have intense commercial use adjoining the site. For example, the Wendy's, I believe, operates 24 hours a day, and there are uses within the Raleigh Center that are operating 24 hours a day, as well as the Quick Stop gas station that's just to the north as well. The site is located along the freeway and has freeway frontage and visibility. We will access directly from Golden Valley Road. That access was coordinated with NDOT. We had several meetings with NDOT in determining the placement of our driveway, and that's been coordinated with their future improvements that they plan at the interchange to make sure that we didn't have any conflicts and that we had the proper spacing of the driveway on the plan. We did consider access from either through the post office or the bank. The bank access is not really feasible based on the grade difference in the way their parking lot is configured, and the post office was not willing to grant access through their facility. Next slide, please. Just some overall considerations. This is an infill site, sort of the last big commercial piece left there in Golden Valley. So as an infill site, all the infrastructure needed to serve the project is already there and in place with capacity. The proposed uses are compatible with the surrounding uses. Once again, no residential adjacency on this project. The project design ensures compliance with the adopted drainage standards, in other words, the 1 to 1.3 drainage. There was a comment that was emailed from one of the neighbors related to the car wash and potential noise. And I know that if you look at the Quick Stop car wash that's further to the north that faces residential, that facility was, I believe, developed in the county without any consideration of residential adjacency standards. And so the wash faces the residential and it runs 24 hours a day, and the dryer system is really quite loud. And I think that's what that concern is. Our car wash, as you can see from the site plan, has a significant amount of separation from any residential use. It's actually buffered by the intervening buildings, both existing and those proposed within our project. And I'm not sure if the resident that made the comment had the opportunity to see that. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a quick summary of the project as a whole. The storage facility is just over 35,000 square feet, not proposed for 24-hour operation. The sit-down restaurant is going to be approximately 7,000 square feet and will include 24-hour operation. Given all the industrial growth that's happened out in the North Valleys and the fact that those facilities generally run 24 hours a day with 3 shifts, we thought that it would be important to have a 24-hour restaurant where those people could actually have somewhere to go to eat, as well as with the hotel on site. I think it's complementary to that. The gas station convenience store, about 4,600 square feet, that will have 24-hour operation. Hotel total square footage is 60,000 square feet, and it obviously will have a 24-hour bell desk. And then the car wash at 2,800 square feet, which is essentially the car wash tunnel, not proposed for 24-hour operations. Next slide, please. These are the proposed building elevations for the storage facility. As you can see, it's not your standard mini storage. They're individual indoor lockers that are climate controlled. There is a door on the first floor that a car can drive into the building, and then there's elevators within the building itself. It really looks more like an office building or a commercial building compared to your standard mini storage use. Next slide is the car wash. You can see that it's got a tunnel. The cars come in through the tunnel, and then will circle into the vacuum stations that are just to the south of the main car wash building. Next slide is the restaurant. As you can see, kind of everything is complimentary. I should point out on the previous elevation you saw, they look like they're black and white. I think the PowerPoint doesn't really do it justice. They're actually varying shades of gray and white, so that the color kind of washed out into the PowerPoint, and I apologize for that. Next slide. These are some site renderings that were done to kind of show you the project in context. As you can see there on the right of your screen, the existing, the post office, the Wendy's, and Jiffy Lube, and kind of how it relates to the industrial properties on the other side of Golden Valley Road. Next slide. Kind of a different view as you're coming off the Golden Valley Road off-ramp headed northbound of how that would look kind of along the freeway frontage. Next slide. This is as you're driving into the property from the primary access on Golden Valley Road. Next slide. The storage facility, and as you can see, the hotel further to the west there in the background. Next slide. The restaurant, which is at the northeast corner of the property. Next slide. The car wash with, once again, I think this really shows the, oh, I think we skipped a slide. Oh, okay, that's, I apologize, that was one off. That's the gas station building. And then next slide. There's the car wash. And as you can see, that storage building really does screen the car wash. So the residents, I believe they're about 600-700 feet to the closest residential neighborhood. But as you can see, that building is very well screened from any residential use by the proposed storage facility. Next slide. Lastly, the hotel, which is really kind of oriented towards the freeway, anchors the western portion of the site. And that's my final slide, so on to the next. So we're happy to address any questions or concerns you may have. Like you said, the project engineer is available, as is the applicant. We are in agreement with the conditions of approval, and with that, I'll turn it back over to staff. Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Mike.
thank you for Mike, the presentation. So now we have a presentation from staff.
Just one moment. We're having a little technical difficulty here. Just a moment.
Did I lose everybody?
We will be right back. We're just getting set up.
Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. Heather Manzo, Associate Planner. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear you.
Heather.
Could you just give us a few minutes, please?
You bet. All right, perfect. So Mike did a great job of describing the special use permit request for the car wash use, the mini warehouse, as well as the 24-hour uses. And while Michelle's working on getting a PowerPoint presentation going, I'll just let the Planning Commission know that I did receive two different folks that had either called in or sent an email over. One was a general request of what the project was, and they didn't share any opinion for or against the project. And the other is the public commenter that you received an email with concerns about 24-hour operations, especially as they pertain to some of the outdoor vehicle activities associated with a car wash and gas station use. And so are you able to see me moving the mouse around on the screen?
Do not believe
No.
so.
No, okay. So there is a residential neighborhood to the northeast of the project across Golden Valley, to the north, just a little bit south of that, Michelle. There's the industrial building on Golden Valley Drive and the commercial site where the Longboard Pizza, I believe, is located, and then there's a residential neighborhood in that area. And that is the closest residentially zoned property from the subject site. And the way that the site plan is laid out, as Mike had pointed out, the gas station and car wash uses have been proposed as close as possible to the freeway and as far as possible from Golden Valley Road and the residential properties to the north. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the zoning map, and it actually shows that SF15 property that I was describing on the previous screen to the northeast of the subject site. Next slide, please. And so Mike shared a better looking site plan that I've got for you this evening. However, I did want to note that in your staff report, the traffic analysis had noted that the proposal was for right in, right out only. I did take a look at the traffic study this evening, and it does appear that there was a left turn proposed as a part of this request prepared by Mr. Salegi. And with that, we received comments from the RTC as well as from our community development engineering upon reviewing this. And Golden Valley Boulevard really does have a lot of activity on it, and it is located pretty close in proximity to the freeway interchanges. However, Golden Valley is the only point of access that this project can take. There is no easement, and as Mike had mentioned, other owners of property to the north of it are not willing to grant access to the property. So this site really is subject to access being taken only from Golden Valley Boulevard. And so with that, there is a condition recommended based on engineering input and RTC input that an S curb be installed along Golden Valley, which would restrict left turn egress from the site onto Golden Valley, but it would allow for left turn into the project site. Next slide, please. And then I believe the next two slides are actually of the building elevations that Mike already shared with you. So staff did evaluate the request for 24-hour use on the property. And because of the location, its proximity to the freeway and to other commercial uses that operate 24 hours and the distance from residences within the area, staff did not make any recommendations on limitations to hours of operation. However, in Mike's presentation, he did note that the mini warehouse and car wash uses were not proposed to operate 24 hours. So if Planning Commission wishes to do so, we could check in with the applicant on proposed hours of operation for those two uses to further address the concerns that had been shared by residents. and that staff is recommending approval of this request. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Before I check on public comment, I will ask commissioners for disclosures, starting with Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I received one email regarding the car wash.
Thank you. Commissioner Gower?
Commissioner Gower is today.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site, talked with the applicant's representative.
Thank you. Commissioner Marshall?
Commissioner Marshall, I did a drive-by and read the email.
Thank you. Commissioner Olivas?
I visited the site and received the email.
And Commissioner Velto?
The same.
And Commissioner Johnson, I read the email and I'm familiar with the site. Michelle, do we have any public comment on this item?
I did not receive a request to speak on this item.
Okay. Then I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for any questions of staff or the applicant. Questions or discussion? Or a motion?
I'll give you a motion, Commissioner Hawkins.
Okay, Commissioner Hawkins?
In the case LDC 20-00053 Golden Valley Commercial, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the special use permit subject to conditions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a motion. Looking for a second.
Commissioner Marshall, I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Commissioners, any additional discussion? Okay, then I'll ask for a vote. Again, working my way down the line, Commissioner Taylor?
Aye.
Commissioner Gower?
Yes.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall?
Aye.
Commissioner Olivas?
Yes.
Commissioner Velto?
Yes.
And Commissioner Johnson, I vote aye as well. So motion carries unanimously. Good luck with your project.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, Mike, you as well. Okay, and we'll move on to next item on our agenda, item 5.4, case number LDC 20-00054, the Logistics Center 395 Phase 2 Condition Amendment. And we will give Michelle a moment to bring the applicant in for their presentation.
Ken, are you there?
Ken, good evening. Can you hear us?
I can. Good evening.
Do we need to, or do you have your PowerPoint presentation up, or do we need to bring it up for you?
I should have it up. All right. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we see it.
Yes, we can.
And you have 15 minutes.
All right. Thank you, and good evening, commissioners. This application for a special use permit relates to a project in the North Valleys that we've been working on since 2015. It's called Logistics Center 395 Phase 2, and it's located north of US 395 in between Lemon Drive and Military Road. We have been before the Planning Commission and the City Council several times on this project, starting with the original master plan amendments and zone changes, and then following up with several special use permits through the years, first for construction of the overall site, as well as additional conditions that dealt with the orientation of the building and 24-hour operation. And finally, the last special use permit that we submitted for building number 1 related to large concrete pours. We did not originally envision the amount of concrete that would be poured on this site, and I think as you've seen through the last couple of years, it's critical on these large concrete pours that you begin early in the morning to have time for the concrete set before nighttime. And so we got a condition that allowed us to be able to make those large concrete pours on this second building, which you see is there as building number 2 and 3. But we have a great new company that's moving to Reno. They're called Uline. They're out of Wisconsin. And Uline is a terrific company. They're above board on everything They install more and larger landscaping. They do a better job of maintaining their site, their landscaping, their parking lots, and they also build a much better building. The original condition for the large concrete pours contemplated a 6-inch floor slab, and now the new building will have an 8.5-inch floor slab, which is a lot of additional concrete. So the original condition of approval, which contemplated a thinner floor slab, only gave us 5 weeks and 2 days per week to do these large concrete pours. And we're requesting to extend that to from 5 to 9 weeks and from 2 days to 3 days a week to be able to pour the larger amount of concrete in the slab-on grade and the panels. We have done a significant amount of neighborhood outreach on this project ever since its inception. And as a result of that outreach, we added multiple large landscape berms, stacked rock walls. We tucked the building behind the large hill to the north. And now the good thing with the third and final building is even the 2 existing buildings will act as buffers to the site. So I don't believe we've received any negative comment to date. We have worked very closely with 2 neighbors immediately to the east of the site in the last few days and committed to building them a new wood fence and additional landscaping if needed for screening. I believe they're now okay with the project. But again, I think this will be great to get a company like Uline to Reno with the quality business that they have and the pay and the benefits that they offer their employees, and hope that you approve this request. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Appreciate that. Now we will get a presentation from staff. I see Kyle popping up on my screen here. So, good evening, Kyle.
Good evening,
Kyle.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Kyle Chisholm, Assistant Planner, for the record.
Just 1 moment. We're bringing
is
your
my
presentation
PowerPoint
up. Yeah, we're bringing it up. Just
Okay,
1 moment,
thank you,
okay?
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle. Ken did a great job overviewing the project. There's a lot of this project may look very familiar to you because it's been through the Planning Commission numerous times. Next slide, please, Michelle.
Hang on. We're having a little difficulties here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a little ortho view of the project site. It does not look like that today. There's been more construction. So those 2 large buildings that you see in the middle of the picture there is the project site. It's originally was about 130 acres, but the remaining portion of this project's about 58 acres, plus or minus. And so there was a total of 3 buildings proposed with the original special use permit. And the original special use permit was for construction of a warehouse distribution facility adjacent to residentially zoned property. Hours of operation between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. and disturbance of a major drainage way. If you see over to your right, kind of you'll see Lemon Drive there, and to the left of the site is Military Drive. And those, the site is right smack in the middle of those 2 arterial streets. The residential adjacency is to the north, and I can't read the street name, sorry. You can see those smaller lots just north of the site. That parcel, that larger parcel in between the residences and that building in the center, thank you, is zoned open space. It's a large open space buffer that buffers those properties from this project. The other residences to the east of Lemon Drive are located in Washoe County and are separated by a substantial buffer of Lemon Drive and some very heavy landscaping and a sound wall that was has been constructed and was a part of the conditions of approval. Next slide, please. And again, just another picture of this, the site plan. You can see the 3 buildings there. 2 of the buildings have been constructed. Building 1 on the bottom, building 2 on the top left, and then the 3rd building where it says site is the final and last building that is currently under construction. Next slide, please. And so just to follow up what Ken said, this has been through Planning Commission and Council numerous times. There's been 4 requests for condition amendments to this project, including this one. 2 of the 3 buildings have been completed, and this request is to amend condition of approval number 25 to modify allowable hours of construction, and I've kind of just highlighted or bulleted 4 of the main points of that, which is to add wall panel pours, change the maximum days per week from 2 to 3 days, change the maximum duration from 5 to 9 weeks, and add specific hours for slab on grade and wall panel pours. Next slide, please. So there's what the condition looks like with the red line amendments. Staff did need to change the original exhibit for this because many of the exhibits didn't apply anymore. So it's been changed to Exhibit B, which was provided in the staff report. That exhibit showed the area for noticing. So with this condition amendment, or with the original condition as well, there was a requirement to provide written notification to the neighbors within the vicinity of that exhibit, and also to the administrator within 14 days prior to the nighttime pours. Next slide, please. So public input today, basically I've had 1 call and 1 email with concerns from the county residents, a couple county residents to the east of the project. Just kind of asking about why a sound wall wasn't installed on their section of Lemon Drive, and the main reason for that was, and it wasn't conditioned as such because that those residents are separated by a large landscape buffer in Lemon Drive, as well as some other properties. And the applicant, as the applicant's representative stated, they have worked with these residents very closely, and I was informed this afternoon just before Planning Commission that they were satisfied and their concerns have been addressed. And just a couple more things. Just recently, staff has heard a lot of concerns from developers, not just with this project, but many projects across the city about the challenges they're facing with concrete pours and restrictive construction hours. And so, and primarily that's due to the tight window frame for ideal weather conditions for pouring concrete and other logistical issues. So really the bottom line with this is, from staff's take, is that the amended hours as proposed here is anticipated to reduce the overall impacts to the area, including the residences, by reducing the total amount of time of construction. And so really that was really the most important thing here from staff's analysis. Next slide, please. Staff was able to make all the applicable findings as remains unchanged as with the original special use permit approval, and recommends that the Planning Commission approve the amendment subject to the conditions. and I am available for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. Before I call for public comment on this item, I will ask commissioners for disclosures. We'll start again with Commissioner Taylor.
Commissioner Taylor, I visited the site.
Commissioner Gower.
Commissioner Gower previously visited the site.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Commissioner Hawkins visited the site as well as speak to the applicant's representative.
Okay. Commissioner Marshall.
Familiar with the site.
Commissioner Olivas.
Visited the site and received the email.
And Commissioner Velto.
Visited the site.
And Commissioner Johnson, I previously visited the site as well. Michelle, do we have any public comment on this item?
I did not receive any request to speak on this item.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I will turn it back to the commission for questions of either staff or the applicants. Commissioner Marshall?
Kyle, I was just trying to look at the hours the hours of pour. So you can, I mean, the reason why you want to start it for slab on grade, start at 2 a.m. is because you have a larger, can you explain why it's from 2 to 6 and the walls are from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m.? What is it, why can't we run the slab on grade same as the wall panel? Or what's the reason for the difference?
And the applicant is here to answer as well. They might have a little more background on the construction and the logistics of that. My understanding is that they specifically requested to limit those because to avoid the peak hour traffic times. And so that's, I think that's my understanding of it. If Ken might have something to add of why he's requesting that be added.
Yes, and I can address that. It has to do specifically with the amount of concrete in the pour. The largest pours are the slab on grade, so they take longer to get all the concrete poured and to finish the concrete and allow that to set to a point where the construction workers can leave and go home in the early. And the wall panels don't have quite as much concrete as the slab on grade. So it's strictly limited to the pours, and we tried to squeeze the hours down as much as we can to be able to complete the work before evening hours.
Okay, thank you. Kyle, did I understand that, so could you walk me through why, is condition 28, I mean, it's a condition of approval. Are you saying now it's not valid, or, I mean, how are we dealing with the sound wall?
Oh, the sound wall is still a condition of approval and has been completed.
Okay. Then, sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Commissioners, additional questions? Or discussion? I guess I'll just chime in. I think we have seen this come up before, and understand staff's point of view on this particular situation. I am a little concerned that the application, you know, we're on the last building. So the first two buildings, obviously having heard what the applicant said, there may be some differences in terms of how they're approaching this one, but we're basically modifying this for the final phase of the project. So I have a little bit of concern about that, but I do understand that I guess the trade-off, as I'm seeing it here, is that there's more early morning work in order to shorten the overall duration, so that, you know, instead of instead of a 12-month project, Kyle, if I'm correct, we're looking at something shorter than that, even though we'll have more nighttime hours.
Yeah, that's correct. Really what they're trying to do is hurry up and get this last building done, is my understanding, which in my analysis would be beneficial to the area. Not only that, the more flexible hours for the early mornings, as you can see, the meat of the construction is limited from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and that just doesn't work for concrete pours. Also, it allows a lot of concrete trucks to come in early mornings before those peak hour traffic times hit. So it really helps to reduce those traffic impacts.
And I understand that, and I appreciate you weighing in on that. I think I'm just obviously looking at, we're being asked here as a commission, and I'm looking at basically finding F. We're being looked at weighing the impacts of the noise and the vibrations and that during the evening versus early morning versus a longer period of time. And this isn't the first time we've seen it. It won't be the last time we've seen it. I just wanted to mention it because instead of it being brought to us at the very beginning, it's the last project. And I guess probably the way that I'm able to move forward looking at this is the fact that we have completed the other site amenities that were designed originally to minimize the impact. So those are in place. So hopefully that will take care of it. So that was my comment on it. If there aren't any other comments, I'll be looking for a motion. Mr. Marshall, a question?
No, just a one comment. I just want to echo. I think I can't remember if it was this one or another one, but we had, in some of these, we had a pretty good back and forth on the number of days during the week, to limit the noise and the impact on the neighbors. And, I don't, somehow I'd like us, just my preference would be, once we make those kind of hard decisions where we're balancing and weighing those competing factors, to, that's the condition for the project, and absent, really compelling reasons, they shouldn't be changed, or we shouldn't have to keep coming back and hearing these. I'm just worried that, we're not really setting a precedent. I think there's enough factors here to separate it. It's just the last part of this project, but I don't know, I'd rather not have to renegotiate or rediscuss these kind of balancing questions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Commissioner Olivas? We can't hear you.
Oh, I had two mutes going. Sorry. I had a question related to condition 25, and I wasn't sure. It seems like this has come up before, but it requires the backup alarms to be deactivated and to use flaggers. Does OSHA allow those to be turned off, or is the flagger requirement the requirement that allows them to be turned off?
And this is Ken Crater, the applicant. I address that. Yes, OSHA requirements do allow you to turn off the backup alarms as long as you do have flaggers, but we also have white noise devices that the neighbors can't hear but are very effective and very safe. And we use those on the last pours, and I don't believe we had a single complaint on the last pour that we did for the last building, number 2.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any other questions or a motion?
Make a motion.
Commissioner Hawkins.
In the case of LDC 20-00054, based upon compliance with the applicable findings, I move to approve the amended special use permit subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, and I can make the findings.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins. I have a motion. Looking for a second.
Commissioner Taylor, I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Taylor. The motion is second. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask again for a roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Taylor.
Aye.
Commissioner Gower,
Yes.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Marshall,
Aye.
Commissioner Olivas,
Yes.
Commissioner Velto,
Yes.
and Commissioner Johnson, aye as well. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
You can. Thank you, Kyle. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay, next item on the agenda, item number 6, Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Liaison Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Gower. Our April, our last meeting, I believe, was canceled, so we have another meeting. I think our next one is probably going to be in June.
I think that is correct.
Yep.
Okay. Item number 7, staff announcements. Angela.
Hi there. So maybe just to give you an update first on which items council has approved. The Washoe County School District zone change was approved. That was the one out in North Valleys where the O'Brien Middle School is located. They also approved the Charlins PUD amendment. And the Mountain View Mixed Residential Project that Planning Commission approved but added a condition requiring a pedestrian connectivity. That item was appealed and it went to council last week. Council voted to continue it while the applicant and the neighbors work out agreement for how they want to provide pedestrian connectivity in a manner that both parties are okay with. So that will go back to council on January 3rd.
January 3rd?
January, wow. June 3rd, 2021. Just kidding. Secondly, I just wanted to give everyone an update on some of the staffing changes. We have had a number of staffing changes, starting at the top with our city manager. Sabre Newby has left the city, and replacing her for the interim is acting city manager Chief Soto. So he's our police chief, and now he is our acting city manager. Bill Thomas, who was previously our assistant city manager, has also left the city, and he is now the new executive director of RTC. So we still get to work with him, just in a different capacity. Arlo Stockham has now replaced Bill Thomas as the acting assistant city manager. With Arlo moving up, I am now serving as the acting community development director. I'm also still the planning manager. So all of these positions are acting temporary probably until we get a new city manager on a full-time basis. And then they will appoint a new assistant city manager and community development director. They will get to make that decision. So there have been a lot of changes. We are all happily working in this new capacity, and it's definitely been some challenge with COVID, and again, every day's a new day. We just keep going. So that is it in terms of my updates.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Next is Commissioner suggestions for future agenda items. Commissioners, any future agenda items you'd like to add? Okay. Seeing nobody frantically waving their hands at me, I will move on to item 9, public comment. Do we have any request to speak forms?
No, we
Request
do
to
not.
speak for this item?
No, we do not.
Okay. Thank you. So the last item on our agenda is adjournment.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Second.
Aye.
Thanks.
Aye. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.